the largest cave in the world. Now, I'm sure most of you know at least a little bit about the largest cave in the world. It is, of course, the cave located somewhere in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, at the bottom of the ocean. Now, what makes this cave so unique, besides being the largest cave in the world, is it has these strange murals painted all throughout the cave. Now, this takes up so many square miles because the cave is gigantic, and these murals are of tons, hundreds of thousands of animals. Most of these animals, or a large portion of these animals, are animals from Earth, animals we've seen before. But what makes this cave so strange and fascinating to so many people is there are many animals painted on the wall that we have never seen before in our lifetime. They're completely alien to us in design. We can't even begin to comprehend them. But there's an additional point of intrigue about these murals that actually took scientists many decades to discover after the cave was initially explored and discovered. Is they've actually discovered that these murals of these animals have tiny microscopic, even beyond microscopic, they have these tiny little hats painted on the head of every single animal there. Now, these hats aren't just paintings of tiny little hats. These hats contain intricate computed data and codes that scientists are inputting into their computers and trying to interpolate and understand. Now, the data extracted so far has completely blown the minds of most scientists. This is completely alien information to us. This is, hundreds or if not thousands of years beyond our current technological state of where we're at right now. But these tiny hats have unlocked so much, and that's with scientists having only unlocked about a dozen or so of these tiny hats, because as I said before, these hats are beyond microscopic, and this is in a cave at the bottom of the ocean, so it takes scientists decades to even locate the tiny hat, or if not more than decades, to locate the tiny hats on these murals. And it takes a long time for them to crunch the numbers and crunch the data on actually understanding these hats and putting it through the computers to get that information. Now, of course, some of these hats are going to be a lot quicker for the computers to process, because some of these tiny hats are in fact, they're shaped like cowboy hats, they're shaped like sailor hats, they're shaped like baseball caps. These are hats that we humans know. These are hats that we've all worn before. So of course, it makes sense that the computer can crunch those numbers a lot quicker. It recognizes those hats. Of course, it still takes years for it to fully formate the data from those hats. But if it's a hat we recognize, yeah, of course, we're going to be able to understand that a lot easier. But several of the hats that have been discovered so far on these animal murals, they've been hats that we can't even comprehend. They've been strange hats that, when you look at it very closely, it's hard to even interpret in your head that that's even a hat. You look at it and you think, why is that a strange alien device? Is that some kind of skin issue that the animal has, or is that a crazy tiny little hat that isn't of this world? And of course that's what it is, because when they crunched the data on this, and these are alien hats, so they take a lot longer than regular hats to understand and comprehend. But when they crunched the numbers on these hats, we got far more data than in the other hats. We got far more new technologies. We got far more information that we previously did not know or did not understand. And that's fascinating. And I actually wouldn't even know about this story, about the deepest and largest cave in the world, if it wasn't for my friend Daniel. Now, Daniel's my neighbor, and he told me about these tiny hats and these murals through sending me photographs. Now, me and Daniel are neighbors, but we don't talk to each other very often. We don't meet up very often in person. Sometimes if I'm walking down the street and he's walking his dog, I'll pass him and I'll say, "Hi, Daniel," and he'll wave at me, and I'll give his dog a wave, or maybe I'll pat his dog a little bit. But when I get home, I'll discover that Daniel has slipped a tiny little photograph under my door, very tiny little photograph, the size of like a quarter or something like that, and it's very small, but it contains things that are secrets to me. Obviously, a lot of people know about these things already, but they're brand new to me, and I am just blown away and fascinated. The last photograph that Daniel slid under my door was of a Stegosaurus in his backyard. And obviously it's pure speculation because the photograph is so small. I wish to goodness that it wasn't that small. I wish it was at least 100 times bigger. But it's pure speculation. But I have a feeling that this Stegosaurus is wearing a tiny hat. And I think Daniel has the feeling, because that was greatly implied through the artistic techniques used when he was taking the photograph, that perhaps this Stegosaurus is wearing a tiny hat. What kind of tiny hat it was wearing, who could say? But I, again, would speculate that this is one of the tiny hats that we've never seen before. And obviously Stegosauruses don't exist at this point in time, which made it even more fascinating to me. And I have a feeling that Daniel captured a surreal moment in time, and that Stegosauruses, or Stegosauri for many Stegosauruses, these Stegosauri might in fact be behind the cave paintings deep in the bottom of the ocean. It may somehow be able to traverse through dimensions and traverse through time, because despite these cave paintings containing hundreds of thousands, if not perhaps millions of animals, and as I said, many animals that we've never even seen before, it's covered, so far as they've interpreted, pretty much every single animal that has existed or is currently coming into creation, except Stegosauri. So no Stegosauruses have been located anywhere in the cave painting. And why wouldn't there be a picture of Stegosauri? It's because they're the one painting the cave. Of course, they don't need to paint themselves. They know what they look like. They're from a dimension where almost every single animal is a Stegosauri. They don't need to paint Stegosauruses to know what Stegosauruses look like. It's common knowledge to them. It's a fact. These things are this is their family, this is their friends. You don't need to paint that stuff. You know it in your heart what this is. And I feel like that would also give too much away, because if we located a picture of the Stegosauri, the tiny hat that was wearing is all we need to know, because that would be the tiny hat that would convey the data of this is how you travel dimensions, right? This is how you cross through time, cross through space. This is everything. The tiny hat that the Stegosauri is wearing. And I feel, again, the Stegosauri want us to piece this together bit by bit. This isn't, a simple thing of, discovering everything straight away. This is, are humans smart enough to discover this cave first of all? And then after that, are these humans smart enough to find the tiny hats and then crunch the numbers of what these tiny hats actually mean? And, of course, I'm inclined to agree with the Stegosauri. I think most humans aren't at that stage yet of understanding these murals and the tiny hats atop their heads. But I feel like I'm at a place where I'm understanding it. And I think Daniel is too, because how else would Daniel have been able to take the photograph of that Stegosauri and its tiny hat? And, how would he have known to have sent that to me, and that I would have a deep appreciation and an understanding of that Stegosauri and its tiny hat? So it's really fascinating. Another thing about Daniel, I wish we communicated more in person, but another thing about Daniel is he will mainly send me tiny photographs. And a lot of the time, I'm not home when he gives these tiny photographs to me. But I know they are from Daniel when I pick them up. They're trademark Daniel photography. And again, he's the only one who takes photographs that are so small. Sometimes I feel like telling him, Daniel, you don't need to you don't need to make the photographs so small, so dang small. They're tiny. I can barely see these photographs, but that's him. That's classic Daniel. That's his personality. That's his charm. And I think if I ever did tell Daniel, make this photograph bigger, you buffoon, it would break him, because that's who he is. It's like telling him to change who he is as a person. Like, you're not good enough as who you are. It's not even saying, oh, you could change a bit, you could get better. It's saying the core essence of who you are is a wreck, is a train wreck, because your photographs are so small. And that's not true. Daniel isn't like that. Daniel's not a wreck. Sure, his photographs are smaller than I think most people would like them to be. But that's their charm. That's their artistry. And it's quite beautiful that Daniel's able to convey so much information in all of his photographs that he sends me. And, I hope that one day, hopefully in my living lifetime, scientists are able to crack the codes behind all of these tiny hats. The way they're going is really slow, but technology keeps getting better, so hopefully they'll be able to crack these tiny little hats a lot faster as technology gets better. And I think the way it's going, it's still not going to be done for at least a couple of 100 years, which is sadly probably going to be past my lifetime, unless I get put into a robot body. But it would mean the world to me to get a tiny little hat and be able to travel to the dimension with a Stegosauri and see the secrets behind the universe and all our dimensions. This universe where Stegosauri are wearing these tiny little hats. Now, are all the Stegosauri in that universe and all the ones capable of space and dimension travel, are all those tiny hats looking exactly the same, or would some of their tiny hats look a bit like hats we already have here? Like, again, they painted on the mural cowboy hat, baseball hat, sailor hat, hats we've seen before, as well as ones we haven't seen before. I would be fascinated if hats that they're wearing that are tiny, that look like cowboy hats, are those ones some of the ones that are capable of space travel and interdimensional travel? Because that would be truly fascinating if we already had the infrastructure of the hat that would be capable of jumping dimensions, but we just haven't made it small enough, maybe, or we haven't input enough technical or computed data into that tiny little hat that someone's wearing on their head. But as I said, I dream of the day where I'm sitting at home, maybe I'm ironing some t-shirts or something, or I'm sitting down and watching TV. I like to watch the Food Network and see what people are cooking, but I'm just sitting down, maybe, yeah, as I said, doing chores or relaxing, and there's a knock at the door. There's a knock at the door and there's no tiny photograph this time. Instead, there's a knock at the door, and I answer the door, and it's my neighbor Daniel. And he's looking at me with a huge grin on his face, from ear to ear. Massive grin from Daniel. Like, I've seen him maybe smile a little bit before, like a little smirk, like, but never huge grin like that. And I'm sure when I see Daniel smiling like that, I'll know instantly. And Daniel will slowly reach his hand out to me, and I'll go, "Daniel, don't be messing with me now, buddy. Is this what I think it is?" And he'll be nodding his head, looking at me. I'll be nodding back at him. I'll be smiling ear to ear as well, for sure. And he'll slowly open his hand, and as he's opening it, I'll go, "Daniel, are these some tiny little hats right here?" He'll be nodding, and he'll open his hand up, and they'll be the tiniest little hats you ever saw. Now, I don't know if these will look like cowboy hats, or baseball caps, or sailor hats, or some other kind of hat or maybe a beanie. That's a type of hat as well. Maybe there'll be a hat like that. Or maybe they'll, as I said, be a hat that we can barely interpret as a hat or comprehend. And I'll lick my finger like that, and I'll reach over and I'll tap the palm of Daniel's hand to get the hat on the tip of my finger, because obviously the hats are that small that you can't really, pick them up with pincers like that. You need to get some adhesiveness on the finger and just dab it like that. And I'll lift it up to my head and just brush it across my head, so it gets taken off my finger and put onto the scalp. So I'm wearing it like a hat, like it's intended. And as soon as that tiny little hat goes on my head, my eyes are just whoosh, wide open. A whole new world is revealed to me that I just see the most normal things as, this juice is, I can see all the quantum mechanics behind the juice. I can see the H2O in the air. I can see the oxygen atoms. I can see all the atoms. I can see the quantum particles. I can see the dark matter floating around. I can see everything. I can see all this inside my juice. Thanks, Daniel. And he puts his tiny hat on his head. Whoosh, same thing. Instantly, our eyes open up. We see all of this. We're able to see multiple dimensions at the same time. We're in the Stegosauri dimension. We're in the human dimension. We're in a dimension maybe where everything's made of juice. And in that moment, I look over at Daniel. And he's a Stegosauri now. He's a Stegosaurus. And I look down at my hands, and they're not my hands as I know them. They're Stegosauri hands. Me and Daniel are Stegosauri now. And then that gets me thinking, if me and Daniel are Stegosauri, and we can travel through time and space now, maybe we're the Stegosauri that painted the cave. Maybe we went back into time. We went back through time. We went back through dimensions to our own timeline. And we were the one that painted the cave with all those animals on it. After traversing the other dimensions, after traversing space and time, we've seen all these animals. We've seen animals that, humans at this point in time haven't seen or haven't existed at all yet. And we've seen these animals, me and Daniel, me and my good neighbor Daniel, who I would also consider my best friend. And we've seen these animals, and we've started, and we spend our whole lives painting these murals of these animals. And right before we die, we get around to painting all the tiny hats on their heads. And as soon as I put that hat on my head, when I'm standing with Daniel and I turn into a Stegosauri, I realize that we're the Stegosauri that made the cave. And then I realize the next thing, that this is a mind blower, but I'm actually the Stegosauri in the photograph that Daniel took. That Stegosaurus in his backyard, probably that was wearing a tiny hat. That's me. That was me all along. And I don't know if Daniel knew this when he was taking the photograph. Maybe he could tell by the way I walked, or the way I carried myself, even though I obviously looked a lot different at that time. And at that time I'm a Stegosaurus and not a human being, and at that time I'm wearing a tiny hat, and most of the time I don't wear hats, or I wear regular size hats. That Stegosaurus was me. And then I pick up the tiny photograph that Daniel gave me before, and suddenly I realize this Stegosaurus has given me a wink. I'm winking to myself. I'm winking to Daniel through the camera. But it's not directed at Daniel when I wink at him, when I wink at the camera. It's directed at me when I've just become a Stegosauri. It's like, I know this is the path you're on. You're going to be doing this. You're going to be in Daniel's backyard soon. Not straight away for you, because you're going to traverse through all of space and time first before you come back and start painting, and you start hanging out in Daniel's backyard as a Stegosaurus. I don't know what I was doing there. Maybe I was just trying to plant the seed for Daniel of getting me and Daniel on the path to all these clues to unlock the mystery of the cave and this whole Stegosauri thing. Because as I said, it is quite popular, this knowledge about the cave and the hats and the Stegosauri, but I didn't know about it. I'm kind of embarrassed to say, but I did not know about it at all until Daniel gave me that tiny photograph of the Stegosauri with the hat. Again, probably a hat. We can't see that for sure, but it's pretty much a done deal that Stegosauri is me, and I'm wearing a tiny hat on my head at that point. And we need to get more people to know about this. Because if we want any chance of this happening in our lifetime, and it should happen in our lifetime because that Stegosauri in the photograph is me, we need to get everybody involved in looking at these giant murals of the animals and trying to locate where the tiny hats are on the animals. A lot of animals, it makes sense where the tiny hat's gonna be. A turtle, a person, a dog. yeah, you basically know that the tiny hat's gonna be on the scalp of the head. It's gonna be on the top of the head where the hair is. But then you have other animals like caterpillars and worms, or yeah, things like that, like eels and centipedes. Longer animals that don't have as clearly defined heads. And that's some of the animals that are really stumping scientists because they can't figure out where these tiny hats are. And these people are trained professionals. They've trained all their lives. They've got master's degrees in hats, in quantum mechanics, in art, in history, in everything you can possibly imagine. And it's taken them decades to locate these tiny hats. And I feel like there's so many tiny hats they need to discover. They'll never have a chance of discovering all these tiny hats unless all of humanity gets on board and helps them crowdsource this knowledge of where these tiny hats are and what they actually mean. Because I'm that Stegosauri in the photograph, so it has to happen in our lifetime. So I'm trying to connect to all of you and get you involved in it. Yeah, it's not just the biggest cave in the world, not just the largest cave in the world. It's actually the secret behind the Stegosauri and tiny hats and the future of humanity and interdimensional space travel. It's what it's all about, really, in the end, and even in the beginning and throughout all of time. Because when you're a Stegosauri wearing a tiny hat, that's where you are. You're everywhere at that time. Something that's actually been running through my head a little bit throughout all of this and all this speculation is if I'm the Stegosauri in the photograph that Daniel took, where's Daniel when he's a Stegosauri? I'm trying to think about this because at that point in time, we've already finished drawing the tiny hats. So was Daniel and his Stegosauri in Stegosauri form nearby me when I was a Stegosauri? Or have, for some reason, me and Daniel had some kind of tiff, had a bit of an argument, and suddenly maybe me and Daniel aren't friends anymore, and now Stegosauri aren't hanging out anymore. It's not something I really want to. It's not something I want to happen, because obviously I care clearly about Daniel. I do deeply want to be a Stegosauri with a tiny hat on my head, but I don't want to lose my best friend. And I wish to goodness that in that photograph there had been two Stegosauri. Now maybe me and Daniel, when we're Stegosauri, we're still best friends, and we haven't had a tiff, and maybe he's just buying some groceries at the time when he's a Stegosauri. And I'm just like, yeah, Daniel, you buy some groceries. I'm going to go hang out at old Daniel's place, and I'm going to see how old Daniel's doing and maybe tip him off about this whole Stegosauri and tiny hat thing. And Daniel's like, yeah, that happened. You should do that for sure. It happened, so you should get that done. And then maybe I come home to me and Daniel's Stegosauri home. I don't know which dimension it is, if it's our dimension or if it's even like a real home like me, us humans are used to, or it's some kind of strange, out of dimensional place. But wherever it is, me and Daniel are just hanging out with each other, and we're eating some chips or something like that, and we're like, we did it. I look at him, I say, we did it. He looks at me, just nodding his head. He picks up a tiny little photograph he took maybe when he was at the supermarket. I look closely at that tiny photograph and I say, Daniel, did you just reveal a brand new clue to something that's mind-blowing that I can't even comprehend? He's shaking his head, because Daniel's always doing that. I can't imagine a world or a dimension or a place in time when Daniel isn't taking tiny photographs that reveal some deeper meaning to the universe. I think the tiny photographs he would take when he was a stegosauri that could see across all of space and all of dimension, what's that tiny photograph going to look like? Is it going to be even smaller? Of course it would be. Maybe even when I'm in Daniel's backyard when he took that picture, he was sending the top scientists in the world tiny photographs to help them figure out how to crack this whole tiny hat situation. But the pictures that Daniel's sending at that point are so much smaller than the pictures he sent me, and packed full of so much more information because now he's that much more talented as a stegosauri. But they're that small that scientists aren't even seeing these tiny photographs that they're getting. You know, there could be hundreds of scientists, and he's sending each one hundreds of thousands of photographs, and they're piling up under their door. They're piling up in the letterbox. But they're that small that even 100,000 letterboxes, 100,000 tiny photographs from Daniel is going to be this big in a huge pile. Because they're that tiny, maybe even smaller than this. Because they're that tiny and they can't see the photographs that Daniel sent. And they don't know to look for the tiny little photographs that Daniel's sending. I don't even think I would be able to find a photograph that small if Daniel sent me that one. The photographs that Daniel sends me are already so tiny. I can barely see them. I sometimes worry about opening my door when I get home and one of his amazing pieces of photography just gets blown out the door or blown through my house into the trash can because I can't even see it. So every day when I open my door, I do it very carefully. I wait for the wind to stop, and then I open my door, and I try not to step on anything, and I look around. I get on my hands and knees, make sure I don't get anything on my hands, and I look around, about a 4-meter square vicinity very closely. It takes me about an hour every time I get home because I never want to miss a single one. And I'm on my hands and knees for an hour, just closely inspecting every inch of that space that it could have slid under the door, and arrived in a place that wasn't so obvious to me. And that takes up a large part of my time every single day. But of course I'm going to do it for Daniel, and I'm going to do it for me. I'm not going to miss a single one of those tiny photographs if I can help it. Sometimes when I pass Daniel on the street, I'll try and talk to him about these tiny photographs, and I don't know what it is about Daniel. He's a very shy man. He doesn't like talking in person. So I'll try and say, Daniel, I really loved the photograph you sent me last time. The photograph you sent me last week. That was really fascinating. I hope I'm the stegosauri in your photograph, or maybe it's a different time, Daniel, I hope I'm something else. One of the other mysteries that Daniel sent me, his mysteries are sometimes a bit hard to crack, and it takes me a long time to crack the mysteries. But yeah, I'll mention one of these photographs to Daniel, and he'll kind of like, I don't know, he'll get all flushed and flustered, and he'll head home quickly. Because, as I said, he's a very shy man, and he's very focused on the tasks at hand, like cracking this case about the stegosauri and the hats. So he'll rush on home, not because he doesn't want to talk about it, but just because at that point he feels a bit guilty or not as confident as he should, because he hasn't cracked the codes himself at that point. And that's why I think when Daniel does get the tiny hats that'll cause interdimensional travel, and Daniel does become a stegosauri, he's going to be a lot more talkative, and he's going to be a lot more confident, and he's going to do the things that he should be doing, because Daniel is one of the greatest people I know, man or woman. Out of anyone, he's the greatest, perhaps. I know that's a tall order, but it's Daniel. He's an artist. He's a Renaissance man. He's very clever, and he's good at cracking codes that most people would never dream about being able to crack, like this cave in the Stegosauri. So I think it's all about friendship, really. The enigma of the cave. It's about friendship. And I know I almost teared up earlier thinking about me and Daniel maybe not being friends anymore when we're Stegosauri. I know that's not going to happen. I hope and I pray, but I know that's not the case and not going to happen. But it also really makes me think that I need to embrace the friendship with Daniel that I have right now while we're humans. And of course, I do that every day, but I really should do it a lot more. Because one day we're going to be Stegosauri buddies, and we're going to travel through all of time and space together. And would you really want to travel through time and space with someone who you're not even that good friends with? Because I'm great friends with Daniel. And I know we're going to be a lot better and closer after all the travel and after all the tiny hats we wear. I think if I could choose what my tiny hat would look like when me and Daniel are at that stage, if these tiny hats that travel across dimensions look like different hats, I think I would just want my hat to look like a sailor's hat. Just a casual sailor's hat that I might wear any day down the street. And I think that would also be quite a spectacular look on a Stegosaurus, to be honest. Just imagine a Stegosaurus with a tiny, tiny little sailor's hat. Obviously, not a sailor's hat that human eyes could easily perceive, but sailor's hat nonetheless. And I think Daniel would look fantastic in a cowboy hat. Even Stegosauri Daniel. He would look fantastic in a cowboy hat. And when I see him when he's walking his dog down the street, he sometimes wears like a baseball cap. Sometimes, because he's got a bald spot on his head, and I think is a little bit shy about his bald spot. But I feel like knocking that baseball cap off his head and pulling a cowboy hat out from behind my back and saying, "Daniel, this is your look. This suits you," and just popping that hat on top of his head before he can run on home and gets too flustered, and just almost attacking him with his cowboy hat. But it's for the greater good. I think if Daniel wore a cowboy hat right now and looked at himself, spent a few hours every night looking at himself in the mirror wearing a cowboy hat, his confidence would be back up. I feel like I could talk to him on the street. He wouldn't get flustered and run home. He would be in a place where he's content. To a certain extent, of course, because we're not Stegosauri yet, but he would feel a lot better about who he is, and I think maybe that would help his photography get a lot bigger instead of being so small, because, again, this is some of the most spectacular photography I've seen in my entire life, but that confidence just holds him back from making it bigger. He's like, I'm not that good. I don't deserve to take such a big photograph. My photograph should be a lot smaller. I don't deserve to take all that space up. He does. I feel like if I had my way about it, I would say, "Daniel, you're the most talented person in the entire universe, across all dimensions to me. Your photographs should be as big as the Earth, bigger than the Earth. They should be the size They should be the size of the universe, or even bigger. Even bigger than the universe, they should be the size of your heart. Because I know you've got a good heart, Daniel. Your heart's bigger than the size of the entire universe. That's how big your heart is. And I think that would touch him in a way. He would, maybe Daniel would shed a tear for once. Just thinking about me and Daniel and these tiny hats. Anyway, that's the largest, biggest cave in the world. Thank you for watching. I love you. Bye bye. Love you too, Daniel.